This video is about the High Renaissance in Venice. So we're back into northern Italy, kind of the eastern side of Italy, and we'll be focusing in on two artists. So Giorgione and Titian are the most famous artists and competitors of this period. However, Giorgione will die relatively young, leaving Titian as really the dominant figure of the Venetian High and Late Renaissance. A couple of things to note about the style and the way the paintings are created. So Venetian artists represent light as softer and more atmospheric, and we'll see this in a few examples. And we have to think about this in terms of the climate of Venice and the way Venice looked. Venetian painting is more painterly, so it emphasizes the fact that it is painting rather than hiding those brushstrokes. We see broad brushstrokes and the importance of color, so really playing on the idea that you need color to build up the life of your painting. Figures in Venetian painting are fuller and fleshier, especially in the case of Titian. So when we think about, if we go back to Michelangelo, and we think about his figures, which were so muscular, even the women, we see these very fleshy, beautiful women in the Venetian painting that really demonstrate the differences. And number 5, Florentine artists emphasize drawing, or what is often discussed as disegno or design. Venetian artists paint directly on the canvas. What this means is that Florentine artists are going through a careful process of preparing their panel or their painting ahead of time, drawing out exactly what they're going to paint. Venetian artists are a bit more, they kind of go with the flow a little bit more. They paint directly on the canvas and they might change something. So what this means is that when you have a Venetian painting, doing a number of different scans on it can often reveal the different ideas the artist had before they came to the final composition. So it's interesting to actually look and see what the underpaintings appeared to be so that you can see how these paintings were developed. And then we also have what are called poesia, or visual poetry. These narratives that are somewhat mysterious, that either we've lost the stories of what they are intended to represent, or these are just supposed to be beautiful scenes in the countryside that don't necessarily make sense directly to a story. And so these are works that we've grappled with for years, trying to figure out what they represent. And we'll go through them and think about some of the different interpretations. So just a few notes about the differences to think about. So first off, we have Giorgione's Tempest. This is a very famous work from 1510, right before the death of Giorgione. And the way this work was described was that, or around the time that it was collected, was that it was a gypsy and a soldier. And that doesn't tell us very much. So this has become one of the most enigmatic paintings of all time. So we have a woman who's nearly naked, breastfeeding off to the side, a man who's holding on to kind of a spear type of thing, and we have a broken column behind him. The man is gazing at the woman, and then you have this moment right before a storm is going to break. This is the Tempest, of course. So you see this little crackle of lightning back in these bluish gray clouds. So clearly we're in a landscape in the terraferma, or in the land, the countryside outside of Venice proper. And so there have been so many different ideas as to what's going on. Is this Adam and Eve? Is this some kind of mythological story? Is this related to poetry created at the time? We don't know for sure, and what makes it even more mysterious is we know that Giorgione actually represented a woman here first, that the very first way he created the canvas was that there was a woman kind of bathing, kind of getting into the stream here, and then the other woman doing her breastfeeding. So again, not very logical. You know, is it a Virgin Mary? Probably not. I mean, this woman's just sitting on the ground and, just breastfeeding in a very kind of undignified way. Some people, or one interpretation discusses it as maybe a moment of falling in love. So you have kind of this crackle of lightning. Is this supposed to be equated with Cupid's arrow? This man's gazing upon this woman. Is this supposed to be a self-portrait of Giorgione? So hopefully this gives you a sense of how many different ideas have been put forth. But this really speaks to the idea that we do have a number of these mysterious narratives that we can't quite figure out exactly what they're supposed to represent. But they are beautiful to look at, and there are many elements that speak to kind of the fleshiness of the female figures, the atmospheric quality of Venetian painting, and the beautiful use of color. So next we see here Giorgione's Sleeping Venus. This is another one with a fleshy female form on a landscape, speaking to kind of the land outside of Venice. And what we see here is a woman who is a Venus figure. There originally was supposed to be a Cupid here. This was probably completed by Titian following Giorgione's death and modified, but we see that her eyes are closed, and we can see that this is probably some kind of romantic encounter that's going to happen in the countryside. And we see that even her fingers are kind of curled in a way that indicates perhaps she's even touching herself in a way. That's been one interpretation, and this may be related to ideas of how to bear children and how these images maybe could be instructive, or that they could be erotic in a way to encourage couples to bear children. So these often are associated with marriages and married couples. But what we see here is this woman reclining, eyes closed, one hand up and another one down. And the idea that her eyes are closed is that this allows us to look upon her without her knowing that we're here. So that was supposed to be kind of exciting for the viewer. And a similar work probably by Giorgione, or at least maybe started by Giorgione, we see the landscape is very similar to the Tempest, but the figures themselves are actually very typical of Titian. They're a little bit larger, and Titian's figures tend to be even larger than Giorgione's, even fleshier. But again, we have a very mysterious landscape. A shepherd in the background, two men, one dressed in fine clothing, one dressed in less refined clothing, and then two nude women. So we see a woman here with some drapery pouring water into a fountain, a woman sitting here holding on to kind of a pipe of some kind, a flute. And so we can see again, this doesn't all work together in a logical fashion. Again, this may be a story that we've lost, or a piece of visual poetry that's not necessarily supposed to make sense in a literal fashion. But clearly with these women here sitting in the nude, and these men really not even noticing them, it speaks to the idea that maybe we're seeing things that are like figments of the imagination. And again, this may have just been a trend in painting at the time. This is a work by Titian that we definitely know is by Titian. Clearly, it's deriving a lot of its subject matter and its style from Giorgione's much earlier Sleeping Venus. But the key differences, is that we're inside a palace here. We can see the women getting out a dress to dress this woman. These were basically your closets of the Renaissance. These are called cassone. This is what a woman would take into her new house when she got married. We can see their beautiful tapestries and linens on the walls, so clearly this is a very expensive house. We see the woman reclining here, similar pose, one hand down, one hand up. She is holding flowers, and often the gesture of offering flowers was a gesture of offering yourself. Also, the blonde hair is something that Titian tended to prefer. We tend to see more brunettes with Giorgione, more blondes with Titian. We still see the fleshy female form. We still see kind of that crumpled sheet hinting at possible lovemaking. And we also see a little dog here, which is of course a symbol of loyalty, of fidelity. And so possibly this is indicating loyalty and fidelity in a marriage. So possibly this was commissioned for the Duke Guidobaldo II's marriage. And we actually have some letters where he is very interested in obtaining this painting from Titian. So this seems to have been a painting that he greatly desired. Our final stop is to look at a work that's pretty late, so we're moving into the later part of the Renaissance for this example, but I wanted to show you how Titian's style really changes in the later portion of his career. So we see that his brush style becomes much looser, much more painterly, we might call it. We see the impasto technique here, where you see thick application of paint. And the story here is called The Rape of Europa, and this is a period when rape scenes become much more common, rape and abduction scenes. And this could be something that patrons were very interested at the time, ideas of male dominance. Also, it could symbolically allude to ideas of taking what you want, in terms of taking land that you want or taking something that you desire. So these became very popular representations, and ideas of abduction and rape would have been less disturbing to a Renaissance and Baroque artist or audience than it is to us today. But what we see here is the woman Europa. This is the myth of the story of how Europe came to be. So there was a woman who was playing with her friends, her girlfriends. Zeus spots her, and Zeus was always interested and the ladies, he spots Europa and he turns himself into a beautiful white bull. And Europa becomes very interested, and all of her little friends come and they decorate the bull. They put beautiful flowers on it. We see flowers up in its horns. And when the time's right, Zeus carries her off into the water, and this is how she eventually becomes Europe. But we see here this moment where she's kind of flailing around, her legs are spread, and the idea is it probably was supposed to make the Renaissance audience laugh, that she looks kind of silly here with her fleshy thighs shown. And we even see a little Cupid figure imitating her, riding on a little fish. So probably the Renaissance audience was meant to laugh at this, to think this was funny. But for us, it has kind of some more disturbing implications. And we'll see in some of the later Baroque pieces additional scenes of rape or abduction that we see with other artists like Bernini, Rubens, where we see stories of men carting off women or carrying off women, which again today is disturbing, but at the time would have been received in different ways, and would have spoken to the male dominance at the time, and just different senses of humor.